All right, we are going to begin our study of the prophetic section of the book of Daniel. We have completed 6 chapters so far, and they are referred to as the historical section. The 7th chapter, from chapter 7, we begin our study of the prophetic section. That means chapter 7 all the way to 12 are prophetic. And in our previous lesson, we were in chapter 6, and that was during the time of Darius of the Medo-Persian kingdom. In this chapter, Daniel is going to tell us what happened in the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. And if you remember, in chapter 5, he told us what happened on the last evening of the Babylonian kingdom, or King Belshazzar's life. So what we're going to see here or observe here is that these chapters are not written in chronological order, but they are positioned in such a way that the first 6 chapters talk about what happened in the past, in history, and the next 6 chapters are actually prophecy or things concerning the future. Now, most of the things that was prophecy 2,500 years ago are no longer completely prophecy, because they have already been they are still prophecy, but they form part of the history that we have now. But some of the things are yet to be fulfilled. So we can say 2,500 years later, what we know as the prophetic section is partially now history. So that is just an introduction to what we're going to study. But this section is still known as the prophetic section of the book. So let's go to chapter 7 of the book of Daniel. And Daniel informs us that he had dreams and visions in the first year of King Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. And in that dream, he saw 4 winds of heaven stirring up the Great Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea. And these 4 winds of heaven can also be translated as a great storm from heaven, with strong winds from all directions. And this can also mean political and social agitations. Some interpret the winds as God's judgment based on, or similar to what we read in Revelation chapter 7. But some interpret the winds as the things done by the satanic forces. In this dream, Daniel sees 4 different beasts or animals, and each one is different from the other. And each of these beasts represent a king and his kingdom. And these beasts are, of course, arising out of the Mediterranean Sea, which means everything we're going to study is related to the kingdoms in that area. And these 4 beasts representing the kingdoms have no allegiance to the true and living God. In other words, we are talking about the gentile kingdoms. And while Daniel is watching whatever he's watching in the dream, and now we know what he's watching, he's seeing 4 different beasts coming out of the sea in succession, one after another. And while he's looking at the 4th beast representing the 4th kingdom, there is an interlude. In other words, his eyes are taken off from the earth and he sees something in heaven. In other words, there is an interlude and he sees something in heaven in a vision, and then again he comes back to the earth in his dream and continues to watch what is happening to the 4th beast, which represents the kingdom. And then again he is taken to heaven for another short period of time, and he sees what is happening in heaven, and then he comes back to earth, and that is the end of the dream. And then, of course, in that dream, he asks a person to tell him the meaning of what he was seeing, and that person helps him to understand everything he has seen in that dream. And this person could be an angel. We will talk about that in a little bit later. So what we have here is a dream and visions within the dream, and that's how I see it. A vision, a dream, a vision within the dream, and then again dream continues, another vision within the dream, and the dream continues and then ends. And then before it ends, he gets the interpretation from an angel. And in in verse 16 of this chapter, he says he was really troubled by everything he saw, and he wanted to know the meaning of all those things. So he approaches one of those standing there. That's in verse 16, I think. And some versions, depending on what version you're reading right now, it says he approached one of those standing there, or one of the ministers, or one of those standing beside the throne. Remember, I said while he was watching the dream, and then the dream was about things happening upon the earth. While he was watching, he was taken to heaven twice. Or when I say he was taken, I don't mean he left his body and his spirit went up to heaven. I mean he was seeing something happening in heaven. So in that vision, there were angels and others ministering to God. So he asked one of them, so that could be an angel, because in my understanding, in that vision, he was in the throne room of God, not physically. I don't mean to say he was there physically, but in that vision, he was in the throne room of God, and there were ministering angels, and he asked one of them. Okay, I think this is clear to you guys. And Daniel first narrates the dream, tells us the dream, and he tells us what happened or what he saw in the dream, and he also tells us the vision. And then at the end, he gives us the interpretation of what he saw. The interpretation is not his own interpretation, but the interpretation given to him by the angel or whoever was there. So let's now talk about the dream and its interpretation. This is how we're going to study this chapter. We will not go to every single verse of this book, this chapter, I mean, but we will consider the dream and the interpretation together. In this chapter, the interpretation is given at the end, but we will look at the dream, the different aspects of the dream or the details, and also at the same time, I will give you the interpretation which is given at the end of the chapter. And once that part is completed, we will go to the interlude, what happened in heaven or what he saw happening in heaven. And we may be able to complete this study this evening, and if we don't, we will do it. We will complete it in our next session. I think I'm clear so far, or you guys are clear about what I'm saying. And you can, if things are clear, you can give a thumbs up, and if it's not, let me know. All right. All right. So let's look at the dream. In that dream, as I said earlier, he saw four different beasts coming out of the Mediterranean Sea. And each one of those beasts was different from others. That's the information we have. The first one that came out of the Mediterranean Sea or the Great Sea looked like a lion. That's in verse 4. This lion that he saw, this beast actually, had 4 wings like an eagle. And as Daniel watched, the wings were plucked off. It was made to stand on 2 feet like a human and was given a human mind. This lion or this beast, the first one, represents the kingdom of Babylon. And lion is found in Babylonian architecture during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and therefore most scholars agree on this. that this beast or lion represents Nebuchadnezzar and the kingdom of Babylon. When we say Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar actually represents the kingdom of Babylon. And the plucking of wings. Remember, in another dream, I think that was in chapter 4, where uh, Nebuchadnezzar went through an experience. He saw the dream first, then it came to pass. Everything he saw happened. In that dream, he was the authority, or was taken away from him. His kingdom was taken away from him for a short period of time. Then it was restored to him. And the plucking of wings stands for his humiliation, and we studied that in chapter 4. And then it says a heart of man was given to him. That represents the restoration of his sanity, and also the restoration of the kingdom to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, you may have a question why this dream is or this information is repeated, because soon you will find that Daniel is seeing exactly what Nebuchadnezzar saw in chapter 2. Remember that a huge statue he saw in chapter 2, and he wanted to know what that meant. Then Daniel came in and interpreted it for him. That was in chapter 2. So you will notice that Daniel is seeing exactly the same thing, but at the end of this session, or in the next section, I will explain to you the difference. And the difference is not easily visible, but it is in there. The second beast that came out of that sea looked like a bear. Now, nowhere in the Bible says it was a bear, but it looked like. Okay, so it is again representative of what that beast would do. Again, remember that beast represents the king, who in turn represents his kingdom. Now we are in the 5th verse. And it was raised on one side, or we can say it was standing on its hind legs. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And this beast was told, we don't know who told this beast, but somebody told this beast to get up and eat as much as you want. This bear represents the kingdom of Medo-Persia. Now you know that from our previous study that there was an alliance between Media and Persia. So that's why we call it the Medo-Persia. There are 2 kingdoms joined together. But in that alliance, Persia always dominated the meats. So this bear standing on its hind leg represent that. The 3 ribs in its mouth could refer to the threefold dominion of the Medo-Persian Empire, meaning the Medo-Persian Empire consisted of Media, Persia, and Babylonia. Remember, Medo-Persia conquered Babylonia. And whoever said that, whoever told that bear to get up and eat as much as you want, could refer to the conquest of Lydia, Babylonia, and Egypt. And these are things of the history. You can check that later. You can find them in secular history. Now so far we have looked at 2 beasts. 2 more are left. The third one looked like a leopard. It had 4 birds' wings on its back, and it had 4 heads. Great authority was given to this beast. The leopard represents the kingdom of Greece. And Alexander was the founder of this kingdom. In the secular world, he is known as Alexander the Great. The 4 wings represent the 4 kingdoms that came out of Greece, and the 4 heads represented the 4 generals of Alexander. And we will talk about these 4 kingdoms. In other words, we will talk about Alexander of Greece, and also the 4 kingdoms that came out of Greece, and those 4 generals in another chapter. So as of now, we are just going to refer to, just look at this third kingdom as Greece, and we're going to move on to the fourth beast. The fourth beast is important, or I would say that's the most important thing in this chapter. Daniel did not name this beast. All he said was, this beast was different from all others. And he also said, this beast was terrifying, frightening, and powerful. And it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed its victims with huge iron teeth. So this was terrifying, frightening, and very powerful. It had large iron teeth, and then it devoured and crushed its victims. It trampled their remains beneath his feet. Actually, I should say its feet. This beast represents the kingdom. Okay, we have to pause here because, as I said, the fourth kingdom, or excuse me, the fourth beast is important because this fourth beast not only represents the fourth kingdom of the past, but it also represents the we can say the fifth kingdom, which is still in the future. And as we progress in our study, we will know, or you will know what I'm talking about. So we need to pay some attention to this beast here. This kingdom, the fourth kingdom, is going to be different from all other kingdoms. It is much more fierce. It is stronger than all the other kingdoms we have seen so far, all other three kingdoms. This kingdom would be, now I'm talking about the future. Okay, it was, and when it comes in the future again, it's going to be ruthless and militarily very powerful and repressing. Okay, now we can pause and you can recollect everything you have learned so far from the previous chapters. Go back to chapter 2. Just think about, just try to recollect what you learned about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. Remember, in his dream, he saw a huge statue. It had a golden head, or the head was of gold, and then it had its chest and arms of silver, and then it had its thighs of bronze, and then the legs were of iron, and then the feet were of partially baked clay and iron. So it was partly iron and partly clay. Then most of the scholars see four kingdoms in that statue. But if you remember in chapter 2, I told you, I believe there are five different kingdoms in that one statue, or we can say four kingdom, but then the fourth kingdom coming back in the future as the fifth kingdom, or whichever way you want to look at it, or as the fourth kingdom coming again, or the revived fourth kingdom, if you want to call it that way. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, when Daniel interpreted it, he said it represented Babylonia, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And that's what most scholars believe. But some scholars believe what I just said. They see five kingdoms there. And I believe Nebuchadnezzar saw five kingdoms, and I'll give you the reason for that. He saw the four successive kingdoms, that is Babylonia, conquered by Medo-Persia, conquered by Greece, conquered by Rome. He saw those four kingdoms in succession in that statue as interpreted by Daniel. But then after that, the feet of iron and clay, that is an important aspect of that dream, and that's where we're going to focus right now. So the gold represented Babylonia, or the head made of gold represented Babylonia. The chest and arms of silver represented Medo Persia, if you remember, and the belly and thighs. Okay, belly was the part I was missing. Okay, the belly and thighs of bronze represented Greece. The legs of iron represented Rome, and the feet of iron and baked clay represented the last Gentile kingdom. Now, why this is important? Because in that dream, now we are not in chapter 7, we are in chapter 2, okay? Just for clarity. In that dream, he saw a rock that was cut from a mountain, and that rock, it struck the feet of that statue. Not the leg, not the head, not the chest. It struck the feet of the statue, and that feet was partly iron and partly baked clay. Has this occurred yet? No, this hasn't occurred yet. The Babylonian kingdom is a part of history, world history. Medo Persia is part of the world history. Greek is part of the world history. Rome, we are more familiar with because that was the last. But this rock being cut out from a mountain and then hitting the feet made of iron and clay hasn't occurred yet. That is actually the last kingdom that would be upon the earth when the Lord Jesus Christ comes back for judgment. That hasn't happened yet. That is still in the future. So if you want to call it the fifth kingdom, that is fine. If you want to call it the fourth kingdom or the revived fourth kingdom, that's also okay. I think most scholars don't want to call it the fifth kingdom because they want to give the number 5 to the kingdom that is going to be established by the Lord himself. They want to give number 5 to the Lord, so I have no problem with that. But we should be clear. If you're going to number the kingdoms, then we should have some order so that there is no confusion. If you want to call it Kingdom 4A, that's fine with me. If you want to call it the Revived Kingdom 4A, that's fine, as long as we are clear on what we are talking about. Or if you want to say Kingdom 4, Part 1 and Part 2, that's also fine. So Daniel, in history, now we are back in chapter 7, okay? So Daniel is seeing all the kingdoms. And this is happening during the first year of Belshazzar. That means Daniel is in the kingdom of Babylon while he's watching this dream. And the first beast that represented the kingdom is Babylon, and he was in Babylon, and all other kingdoms were still future for him. And he's seeing Babylon, and then Medo Persia, and then Greece. And then the description of the next kingdom, that is the fourth kingdom, is not limited to the next kingdom of Rome, but it's also about the future kingdom, as I said earlier. And most scholars agree that the last kingdom or the final kingdom is going to be from the fourth kingdom or from Rome. It is going to be revived out of the kingdom of Rome. Now, there is another thing we need to pay attention to. Why do I believe that the last kingdom is going to be from the fourth kingdom, and why do some scholars believe that? Is because each of the previous kingdoms were conquered by the latter ones. For example, Babylon was conquered by Medo Persia, and then Medo Persia was conquered by Greece, and then Greece was conquered by Rome. Who is left now? The fourth kingdom, Rome. Who conquered Rome? Nobody. No other king or kingdom ever conquered the kingdom of Rome. So what happened to it? In 476 AD, the last Roman emperor was overthrown, and the fourth Gentile kingdom, or Rome, began to disintegrate. That's what happened. So nobody conquered the fourth kingdom. That means the fourth kingdom, or the kingdom of Rome, is today scattered all over the world. And scholars also believe that the rise of Christianity contributed towards the fall of the Roman Empire. And this Roman Empire is going to be revived, and is going to be the final or the last kingdom that is going to be upon the earth when the Lord comes back for judgment. Now, I want to take you back to chapter 2. You don't have to open the chapter, but just try to recollect the things that we learned, especially about that statue and the interpretation given by Daniel. Now, if you remember, a rock that was cut out of a mountain struck the feet of that statue. And if you want, you can go back and you can open that chapter 2, and read verse 34 and 35. Otherwise, I will read it for you. A stone was cut out, but not by humans. It struck the statue's iron and clay feet and smashed them. Okay, that is very clear. Then all at once, the iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold were smashed. They became like husks on a threshing floor in summer. The wind carried them away, and not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a large mountain which filled the whole world. That is chapter 2, verse 34 and 35. There is a very important piece of information in these verses, or in these two verses actually. And what we just read was the feet of iron and clay, which represented the last Gentile kingdom upon the earth. The last means the one that's going to be there when the Lord comes back. And we just read that the rock struck the feet of iron and clay. That means the rock hit the last Gentile kingdom. But the interesting information is that when you look at, when you interpret the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, or the interpretation given in that chapter, is that the first kingdom was Babylon, the second was Medo-Persia, third was Greece, fourth was Rome, and then the last kingdom. However, this verse says that when the rock hit the feet, which is the last kingdom, all at once, the iron, the clay, the bronze, silver, and gold were smashed. Now, what does that tell you? Of course, we know gold represents Babylon, silver represents Medo-Persia, bronze represents Greece, and iron represents Rome. We know that. But why does the Bible say all these kingdoms were also smashed? What is the Bible telling us? How come the kingdom of Babylonia, and then Medo-Persia, and then Greece and Rome were smashed, whereas there would be just one kingdom when the Lord comes back, the last kingdom? Just think about it. It is not that difficult to understand. When Medo-Persia conquered Babylon, they did not kill all the Babylonians. Some soldiers of Babylonia were killed, and some civilians were killed. The rest of the population of Babylon became a part of the Medo-Persian kingdom. Similarly, when Greece conquered Medo-Persia, the those who survived the battle joined the kingdom of Greece. They became part of the kingdom of Greece. Similarly, when Rome conquered the kingdom of Greece, all the Babylonians and the Medo-Persians and the Greeks, they all became part of the Roman Empire. And this Roman Empire is going to be revived once again. And that's when the Lord is going to come back. So that kingdom, the last kingdom, would consist of Babylonians, Medo-Persians, and the Greeks, and the Romans. That's why the Bible says that when the stone struck the feet, which is the last kingdom, all the kingdoms were scattered and they were destroyed. So that's interesting, isn't it? So when you study, you pay attention to all the details, and that's when Holy Spirit shows you things, and also other secular sources also can help you or help you in confirming what you're learning. So when the Lord comes for judgment, known as the Lord's Day, we have studied about that some time ago. When the Lord comes back to establish His kingdom, the Gentile power would be eliminated. It will be totally destroyed and replaced by the kingdom of God. And I believe you're already aware of this, of the fact that right now is the time of the Gentiles. It's not the time of the Jews. It's the time of the Gentiles. And when the time is over, the Lord is going to come. Lord is going to come back to take us home, but He's not going to come to the earth. He's going to be in the sky, and we're going to go up and meet Him. We know that from our previous study. And then, whenever that is going to happen, the Lord is going to come and establish His kingdom upon this earth. But before that, there would be the final Gentile kingdom. There would be different things happening. We have studied that once earlier. We may refer to it in this study also. And when the angel or whoever was the interpreter told Daniel that the four beasts represented the four kingdoms that would arise out of the earth, and as I said earlier, the kings would represent the kingdoms. But the angel did not give any detailed information about the three kingdoms. And also this in this chapter, Daniel tells us that he wasn't interested about the three kingdoms. He was actually interested about the fourth kingdom. And the fourth kingdom, Daniel said, was different from all other kingdoms because he did not name that beast. Maybe he didn't have a name for it, but all he could tell us is that it was so different from all other beasts. And this beast, the fourth beast, as I said, represented the Rome of the past, and it also represented the Rome of the future. Now, I'm calling it Rome. I do not know what would be the name of the last kingdom. There's no way I can know it. You can know it. But for just to keep things simple and clear, I'm just saying the Rome of the future. They may call it Rome. They may give another name. We do not know. So this fourth beast represents the last kingdom or the revived fourth kingdom. And as I said, Daniel was more interested about the fourth kingdom because he says that the fourth beast had 10 horns. And that's where things changed, because earlier in the Roman Empire of the past did not have 10 kings. It had just one emperor. But now Daniel is seeing 10 horns representing 10 kings who will rule that empire. So that is still in the future. So we are talking about the revived Rome, which is still in the future. And when the fourth kingdom, or Rome, is going to be revived, it is not going to be like the previous empire. It looks like there would be a federation of 10 kingdoms or 10 nations or countries. Or it's also possible that one kingdom is going to be divided into 10 and given to 10 people, or 10 different kingdoms. In those days, they call them kingdoms, but now we call them nations or countries. So it's possible that 10 different countries may come together and form an alliance or a federation, and that would be the final kingdom upon the earth, final gentile kingdom ruling the entire world. And then Daniel tells us that while he was watching those 10 horns representing 10 kings, he saw a little horn coming up among them. And this little horn uprooted 3 of the other horns. That means this little king uprooted, he conquered, he removed, ruled over those 3 kings. That means he removed 3 kings out of the way. And then we are also told that this particular horn or king had eyes like human eyes and a mouth that spoke impressive things. So here we are talking about a human king represented by a beast. And there is a similarity between this and the information given in chapter 13 of the book of Revelation. And it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to go to that chapter, flip your pages and go to Revelation chapter 13. Because the scene of the 4 beasts arising out of the sea is very similar to what we read in the book of Revelation in chapter 3. In chapter 13, I said 3, it's 13. In chapter 13, verse 1, we read that the Apostle Paul stating that, "Then I saw a beast rising out of the sea. It had 7 heads and 10 horns, with 10 crowns on its horns. And written on each head were names that blasphemed God. This beast looked like a leopard, but it had the feet of a bear and mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave the beast his power and throne and great authority. I saw that one of the heads of the beast seemed wounded beyond recovery, but the fatal wound was healed. The whole world marveled at this miracle and gave allegiance to the beast. They worshipped the dragon for giving the beast such power, and they also worshipped the beast, who is as great as the beast. They exclaimed, who is able to fight against him?" Verse 5, "Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority to do whatever he wanted for 42 months, that is 3.5 years. And he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all the people who belonged to this world worshipped the beast. They are the ones whose names are not written in the book of life that belongs to the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was made. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. Anyone who is destined for prison will be taken to prison. Anyone destined to die by the sword will die by the sword. This means that God's holy people must endure persecution patiently and remain faithful. So we see similarity. That means what John saw in the book of Revelation is the same as what Daniel is seeing here. This little horn, now some believe that this little horn or this king is one of the 10, but the text, the way it is rendered, doesn't give that meaning, because as far as I can say, this little horn representing the king, or this new king, is not one of the 10. He's a different king who came and destroyed or conquered the 3 kings out of the 10. It says that he is different from the former ones. It says that very clearly. It doesn't say he was different from the remaining ones. It says this new king or this little king. Why, I don't know why he's shown as a little king. He was different from the former ones. Former meaning the 10. So this is we can say this is the 11th king who came and removed the 3 kings, and we do not know what happened to the 7 kings. But he's going to take over everything, and he's going to become the supreme ruler. And the same information we just read in the book of Revelation. And in the in this 7th chapter of Daniel, he simply said he was speaking blasphemies against God. In the book of Revelation, we have some more details. He was speaking blasphemies against God and speaking against his dwelling place, that meaning heaven, and also he was speaking against God's people. Well, it doesn't say he was speaking against God's people. It says he waged war against God's people. We have the same information in this chapter, in the 7th chapter of Daniel also. Now, we don't have much time to go further, so we'll pause here. And what we have learned so far is Daniel was shown all the kingdoms of the past and the future. The kingdoms of the past for us. For Daniel, all those kingdoms were still future, except the kingdom of Babylon, because this is happening during the first year of Belshazzar, the last emperor. So all other kingdoms were still future for Daniel. And God was so merciful towards Daniel and the people of Israel, that is the Jewish people, that God showed them in advance, because whatever Daniel saw in that dream, he wrote down. And I'm sure the people of those days knew about this book. And the successive generations of Israel knew what was written in this book. And I'm sure they were also able to correlate the information in the book of Daniel with the history of the world, and see that each or everything that God told Daniel is coming to pass. They were able to see it. And I think the purpose of showing this or giving this information to Daniel was to tell God's people of that day, and also to us, that God is watching over his people, and he knows the end. And there's a time set for everything. Okay, these since these are the times of the Gentiles, and the Gentile rule or dominion will be here until it is removed by God himself. And then we haven't covered the rest of the interpretation. Right now we know this 4th beast represented Rome of the past for us. It was still future for Daniel. And then also the fourth beast represented the revived fourth kingdom, or the revived Rome, or kingdom 4A, whatever you want to call. And it tells us that God is still aware of everything that's happening in this earth. And that's what we're going to study when we come back next time about the visions. We will complete the dream part and the interpretation, and then we will also study a little bit of about that those visions, and that will tell us more about how God looks at things. Just to give you an idea, see, the dreams were about what was happening on the earth. Those kingdoms were upon the earth, which is very clear to you. Okay, but while these things were happening upon the earth, Daniel's attention was drawn to what was happening in heaven. And that's why Daniel had dreams and visions within the dream. So we can say he was seeing those. Now, for a human being, is impossible to see two things at the same time. But when God is showing you, I think you can see that. So he was seeing what is happening on the earth and what is happening in heaven at the same time. And remember, in one of our classes, I said we should see what is happening in the heavenly places. So everything that's happening on the earth has a corresponding action happening in heaven or in heavenly places. The demonic kingdom in the heavenly places is actively doing something, and that's why we have something happening on the earth. And at the same time, God is doing what he's supposed to do, which he has already planned even before these things taking place upon the earth. And that's what we are seeing in the book of Daniel. So God is never inactive. God is never sleeping. God is not careless. And that's what we're going to see even more clearly in our next session when we study about the visions. But we will complete the dream part, then we will jump into the visions, and then we'll close that chapter. And then eighth chapter is even more interesting. We'll have some more information about, again, for Daniel, it was a future. For us, it is the past, but great learning, and how God was actively involved in the affairs of man. That's what we're going to see. And then how do you apply that to our time? It is very simple. If God was actively involved for the past 2,500 years in the lives of a human being, he is still actively involved. So let's take courage, and let's be glad that God is active, and if he would take the time to show all these things to Daniel, so that Daniel is comforted and his people are comforted, God would definitely speak to us through this passage that he is still actively involved in everything that's happening, and he has not forgotten his covenant with us. So thank you.